He thought humiliating her would be harmless, just another easy laugh at the range. But he had no idea he was about to expose his own ignorance in front of everyone watching. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and if you believe respect should never be judged by appearance, hit like and subscribe, because stories like this remind us what dignity really looks like. Now, back to Evelyn Carter. The shooting range buzzed with the sharp rhythm of controlled fire, each shot echoing against reinforced concrete walls, the scent of gunpowder hanging thick in the air as men in fitted tactical gear compared scores and boasted quietly about their precision, their voices low but confident, like they belonged here, like they had earned every inch of space on that polished floor. It was the kind of place where reputation mattered more than words, where your skill spoke before you ever opened your mouth, and where newcomers were measured in seconds, judged in silence. Jason Reed leaned casually against the counter, a custom ear protection set draped around his neck, his stance relaxed but deliberate, the kind of posture that told everyone within sight that he wasn't just another shooter, he was one of the best. His last target sheet, pinned neatly to the board behind him, showed tight clusters within fractions of an inch, the kind of grouping that drew nods of approval and quiet respect from the others. He smirked as a younger man tried and failed to match it, shaking his head slightly, enjoying the unspoken hierarchy that kept him comfortably at the top. Then the glass door opened with a soft mechanical hiss, and the rhythm of the room shifted almost imperceptibly. She stepped in slowly, not hesitating, but not rushing either, as if the world outside had taught her patience long before she ever crossed that threshold. Evelyn Carter wore a faded beige coat that had seen better days, her silver hair pulled back loosely, her posture steady but unassuming. Nothing about her appearance fit the environment. Nothing about her suggested she belonged among polished firearms and competitive egos. A few heads turned, some out of curiosity, others out of quiet amusement. Jason noticed immediately. He always noticed. His eyes moved over her once, assessing, categorizing, dismissing. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as he straightened slightly, sensing an opportunity forming without effort. She moved toward the front desk, her steps measured, her gaze calm, as if the whispers that began to ripple through the room never reached her at all. One of the staff hesitated before speaking to her, unsure how to place her in a setting that thrived on clear roles and expectations. Jason pushed off the counter and walked over, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to. Because moments like this broke the monotony. Because sometimes the easiest targets weren't made of paper. "Ma'am," he said, his voice polite on the surface but edged with something sharper underneath. "This isn't exactly a beginner's place." A few nearby shooters chuckled softly, not loud enough to be confrontational, but just enough to signal agreement. Evelyn turned her head slightly toward him, her expression unchanged, her eyes steady in a way that didn't match the rest of her appearance. For a brief second, something unspoken passed through that silence, something Jason didn't recognize and didn't bother to understand. He smiled wider, mistaking stillness for uncertainty. The room leaned in just a little, the energy shifting from routine to anticipation. And somewhere beneath the noise, beneath the quiet arrogance and casual judgment, something else settled into place. Something patient, something waiting. The room hadn't realized it yet, but the moment had already begun. Jason let the silence stretch just long enough to make the moment uncomfortable, his confidence feeding on the quiet reactions around him as a few more shooters drifted closer, drawn by the subtle tension building near the front desk, their arms crossed, their expressions already leaning toward amusement rather than curiosity. He tilted his head slightly, studying Evelyn as if she were a puzzle he had already solved, his tone light but pointed as he continued. "Most people start at the training lanes in the back. Lower recoil, easier. Targets, nothing too serious." A faint ripple of laughter moved through the group, low and controlled, the kind that did not need to be loud to land its meaning. Evelyn did not respond immediately. Her gaze moved past him for a brief moment, scanning the range with a calm that felt out of place, as if she were not seeing polished booths and digital scoring screens, but something else entirely, something older, quieter, something that did not need to prove itself. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, steady, and completely unshaken. "I think I will be just fine right here." The words were simple, but they did not carry hesitation, and that alone made Jason's smile tighten just a fraction. He let out a short breath through his nose, amused more than challenged, turning slightly to the others as if inviting them into the moment. "You hear that?" he said, not looking at her now, but speaking about her as though she were already part of the entertainment. "We have got confidence." Another shooter, a tall man in a black performance shirt, chuckled and shook his head. "Confidence is good," he added, "but this place keeps score." The implication hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. The staff member behind the counter shifted uneasily, glancing between them, sensing that the situation was edging into something uncomfortable but not yet inappropriate enough to interrupt. Jason stepped closer to the counter, tapping lightly on the surface with 2 fingers, his attention returning to Evelyn with a practiced ease. "Tell you what," he said, his voice lowering just enough to draw everyone in. "Why do we make this interesting?" A few phones were already being pulled out, subtle at first, then more obvious, as people sensed the kind of moment that might be worth capturing. "We run a simple round," Jason continued, gesturing toward the main lanes where the advanced targets were set at varying distances, some as far as 50 yards, others designed for precision rather than power. "Nothing complicated. 5 shots. Standard distance. You hit the board clean, we call it a good day." He paused, letting the structure settle, then added with a slight tilt of his head, "And if not, well, at least we all get a story out of it." The room responded with quiet approval, the kind that came from shared expectation rather than fairness. Evelyn stood still, her hands resting calmly at her sides, her expression unchanged despite the growing attention, the shifting weight of the crowd, the subtle pressure that would have unsettled most people in her position. For a moment, she said nothing at all. The air seemed to tighten, the hum of the ventilation system suddenly more noticeable, the distant pop of gunfire from other lanes fading into the background as every eye settled on her. Jason watched closely now, expecting hesitation, expecting retreat, expecting the small signs that confirmed his assumptions. Instead, Evelyn nodded once, a small, deliberate motion that carried more certainty than any of them were prepared for. "All right," she said quietly. And just like that, the tone of the room changed, though no one could quite explain why. The agreement settled into the room like a quiet spark waiting for air, and suddenly everything felt more deliberate, more focused, as if the casual amusement had sharpened into expectation. Jason gave a small nod toward the main lane, stepping aside with a gesture that was both polite and performative, allowing Evelyn to pass, while still maintaining the invisible boundary of control he believed he held. "After you," he said, his voice smooth, confident, already certain of how this would end. The others followed at a distance, forming a loose semicircle behind the firing line, their attention fixed, their expressions ranging from entertained to mildly curious, but none of them expecting anything beyond a brief, forgettable moment. The digital targets ahead flickered softly under the overhead lights, calibrated to standard precision mode, the farthest set at 50 yards, a distance that demanded not just steady hands but practiced control. Jason reached for a handgun from the counter, handling it with the ease of repetition, then paused, glancing at Evelyn as if remembering something. "You familiar with this model?" he asked, not because he needed an answer, but because the question itself reinforced the imbalance he was comfortable with. Evelyn stepped forward, her movements unhurried, her posture steady in a way that felt almost disconnected from the tension around her. She looked at the firearm briefly, not with uncertainty, but with recognition so subtle that it went unnoticed by everyone except the one person who might have understood it, if he had been paying attention. "It will do," she said quietly. Jason raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before it was quickly replaced by amusement. "It will do," he repeated under his breath, shaking his head slightly as he handed it over, the faintest hint of a smirk returning to his lips. A few of the onlookers exchanged glances, some whispering, others lifting their phones higher now, framing the scene with growing anticipation. Evelyn took the firearm with both hands, her grip natural, unforced, as if the motion had been repeated enough times in another life that her body no longer needed instruction. For a brief moment, her fingers adjusted along the frame, subtle shifts that went unnoticed by most, but that carried a precision far beyond casual familiarity. The range officer stood nearby, watching carefully, ready to intervene if necessary, though something about her calm made him hesitate. Jason leaned slightly toward the others, lowering his voice just enough to sound conversational while still being heard. 5 shots, he reminded, center grouping. Let us see how steady confidence really is. The faint hum of the ventilation system seemed louder now, the distant echoes from other lanes fading into the background as the focus tightened around a single point in space. Evelyn stepped into position, her feet aligning naturally, not stiff, not forced, just balanced in a way that did not draw attention but held it anyway. She lifted the firearm slowly, not with hesitation, but with control, her arms settling into place as if guided by something deeper than practice. For a second, nothing moved. No one spoke. Even Jason's smirk paused, held in place by a silence that felt different from before, heavier somehow, less certain. Evelyn's breathing slowed, almost imperceptible, her gaze fixed on the distant target, but not strained, not searching. It was as if she already knew where everything would land before a single motion was made. One of the shooters shifted behind her, a faint sound of rubber soles against polished concrete, and it felt louder than it should have. The room leaned into that stillness, waiting, expecting the moment to break in the way they had already decided it would. But something about the way she stood there, unmoving, composed, began to unsettle that expectation, not enough to change it, but enough to make it hesitate. And in that hesitation, something else began to take shape, something none of them had planned for, something that did not announce itself with noise or force, but with a quiet certainty that refused to be ignored. The room had seen confidence before. What it had not seen yet was control. The stillness held for just a fraction too long, stretching into something unfamiliar, something that no one in that room had planned for. And then it happened, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a precision so clean it felt almost invisible. Evelyn's finger moved with measured control, the motion deliberate and restrained, and the first shot rang out, sharp and contained, echoing briefly before dissolving into silence. The digital target flickered, registering the impact, and a small cluster of numbers appeared on the screen. For a moment, no one reacted. Jason's eyes shifted toward the display, expecting a scattered hit, something off-center, something that would confirm everything he already believed. Instead, the mark sat exactly where it should not have been, perfectly centered, clean, undeniable. A few of the shooters leaned forward slightly, their expressions tightening, not yet impressed, but no longer entirely relaxed. Jason let out a short breath, forcing a small smile as he nodded once, as if acknowledging a lucky start. "Good shot," he said casually, though his tone carried a faint edge now, something sharper than before. "Let us see if you can do that again." Evelyn did not respond. She did not look at him, did not acknowledge the shift in the room, did not react to the subtle change in energy that was beginning to ripple outward. She simply adjusted her stance by a fraction of an inch, her grip tightening ever so slightly, her breathing steady, controlled, almost invisible. The second shot followed, just as measured, just as precise, the sound cutting through the air with the same calm authority. The screen updated instantly. This time, the reaction was slower, quieter, more uncertain. The new mark overlapped the first so closely that it was difficult to distinguish where one ended and the other began. A faint murmur moved through the group. Not laughter, not yet admiration, but something in between, something cautious. Jason's smile faltered for the briefest moment before returning, though it no longer held the same confidence. He shifted his weight, crossing his arms as if settling in, though the movement felt less relaxed than before. 2 shots, he said, his voice steady but tighter now, still early. Evelyn remained exactly as she was, her focus unbroken, her presence unchanged. The third shot came without hesitation, the motion fluid, almost effortless, as if the act itself required no thought at all. When the display updated again, the room reacted differently. This time, there was no murmur, no laughter, no casual commentary. The grouping had tightened even further, the marks converging into a single point so precise it seemed almost impossible at that distance. One of the shooters lowered his phone slightly, his brow furrowing as he leaned closer to the screen, trying to understand what he was seeing. Jason did not speak immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the target, his expression slowly shifting from amusement to something else, something less comfortable, something that did not fit the narrative he had built in his mind. Evelyn exhaled softly, the sound barely audible, and adjusted her stance once more, her movements as controlled as ever. The fourth shot followed, identical in rhythm, identical in execution, and when the display confirmed what had just happened, the room did not react at all. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the ambient noise seemed to fall away, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than anything before it. Jason's arms dropped slowly to his sides, his posture no longer as certain, his confidence no longer as visible. He stared at the screen, searching for something that was not there, some flaw, some explanation that could restore the balance he had lost. But there was nothing to find. And in that moment, as Evelyn prepared for the final shot, the room understood something it had not been ready to accept. This was no longer a joke, and it never had been. The silence before the final shot was no longer anticipation. It was realization, a quiet understanding spreading through the room that something far beyond expectation was unfolding right in front of them, and no one knew how to interrupt it. Evelyn stood exactly as she had before, her posture unchanged, her breathing steady, her presence calm in a way that did not seek attention but commanded it anyway. The firearm remained aligned with the target, her grip unwavering, her focus absolute, as if the distance, the pressure, and the audience no longer existed. Jason did not speak this time. He could not. His earlier confidence had drained into a stillness that mirrored the room around him, his eyes locked onto the display, searching for a mistake that refused to appear. The others stood just as frozen, phones still raised but forgotten, their screens capturing something they no longer fully understood. Evelyn exhaled softly, a controlled release that barely disturbed the air, and then the final shot came, clean and precise, the sound sharp but contained, echoing briefly before disappearing into the same silence it had broken. The display updated instantly. For a fraction of a second, the room seemed to hesitate, as if waiting for confirmation, as if hoping for something different. But the result was unmistakable. All 5 shots, perfectly aligned, merged into a single, flawless grouping that left no space for doubt, no room for explanation, no escape for the assumptions that had filled the room just moments before. No one reacted. No one moved. Even the faint hum of the building seemed to fade beneath the weight of what had just happened. Jason's posture shifted slowly, almost imperceptibly, his shoulders lowering as if the invisible structure of certainty he had built around himself had quietly collapsed. His mouth opened slightly, but no words followed. The smirk that had once defined his presence was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar, something that did not belong to him. One of the shooters behind him lowered his phone completely, his expression no longer amused, no longer skeptical, but searching, trying to reconcile what he had just witnessed with everything he thought he knew. Another stepped closer to the display, as if proximity might reveal a flaw, a trick, anything that could restore logic to the moment. But there was nothing to find. Evelyn lowered the firearm with the same calm control she had shown from the beginning, her movements measured, deliberate, without a trace of pride or performance. She placed it gently on the counter, not as someone who had just proven something, but as someone who had simply finished what was asked of her. Her gaze moved briefly across the room, not seeking validation, not acknowledging the stunned faces or the sudden absence of laughter, but simply observing, as if taking note of a moment that had already passed. Jason finally looked at her directly, truly looked at her this time, and whatever he had expected to see was no longer there. In its place was something he had not prepared for, something that did not fit into his categories or assumptions. He swallowed, his voice catching slightly as he tried to speak, but the words felt out of place now, stripped of their earlier confidence, reduced to something uncertain. The room remained silent, holding on to that moment, unwilling or unable to break it. And in that silence, something became clear to everyone present, not through explanation, not through words, but through the undeniable weight of what they had just witnessed. Skill does not argue. It does not announce itself. It simply waits until the moment it is called forward. And when it arrives, it leaves no room for doubt. No one spoke for several long seconds. And in that silence, something fragile began to crack beneath the surface of the room, not loudly, not dramatically, but in small, almost invisible ways that revealed themselves in shifting eyes, tightened jaws, and the absence of the easy confidence that had filled the space just moments before. Jason finally drew in a breath, the sound subtle but noticeable, as if he were reminding himself how to exist inside a moment that no longer belonged to him. He cleared his throat, his voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier sharpness. That was impressive, he said, the words careful, measured, as though he were testing them before letting them fully exist. A few heads turned toward him, surprised not by what he said, but by how he said it. The authority in his tone was gone, replaced by something uncertain, something unfamiliar. Evelyn did not react immediately. She adjusted the sleeve of her coat slightly, a small, almost habitual movement, before turning back toward the counter, her pace unhurried, her presence unchanged by the attention that now followed her every step. One of the shooters stepped forward hesitantly, his earlier confidence replaced by curiosity that bordered on disbelief. "Ma'am," he said, his voice respectful now, "how long have you been shooting like that?" The question hung in the air, sincere, no longer laced with mockery or assumption. Evelyn paused for a brief moment, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the counter, her gaze lowering just slightly, as if considering something far beyond the question itself. "A while," she replied softly. It was not an answer that satisfied the curiosity in the room, but it was enough to deepen it. Jason watched her closely, his expression no longer guarded by arrogance, but open in a way that suggested he was trying to understand something he had never needed to question before. "You did not just pick that up somewhere," he said, almost to himself, though his eyes remained fixed on her. There was no accusation in his tone now, only recognition that what he had witnessed did not come from casual practice or passing interest. Evelyn met his gaze briefly, her eyes steady, calm, carrying a weight that did not demand attention but held it anyway. "Some things stay with you," she said. The words were simple, but they carried something deeper, something that did not need explanation. A quiet realization moved through the room, subtle but undeniable, as pieces began to fall into place without being spoken aloud. One of the older men near the back shifted forward, squinting slightly as if searching his memory. "Carter," he murmured under his breath, the name lingering as he studied her more carefully. "Evelyn Carter." His voice grew quieter, more certain. "That name sounds familiar." A few others turned toward him, curiosity sharpening as the possibility of something more began to surface. Jason's brow furrowed slightly, his attention shifting between the man and Evelyn, the tension in the room evolving from disbelief into recognition that hovered just out of reach. Evelyn did not confirm or deny anything. She simply stood there, composed, as if the past they were beginning to sense was not something she needed to present or defend. The room remained still, suspended in that moment of quiet discovery, where assumptions had already fallen, and something far more significant was beginning to take their place. And in that stillness, the truth did not need to be announced. It was already there, waiting for them to see it. The name lingered in the air like a thread being slowly pulled, and as it stretched, the room seemed to lean into it, waiting for it to unravel into something recognizable, something real. The older man took another step forward, his eyes narrowing slightly as he searched through years of memory, his voice quieter now, but more certain with each word. "Carter. Evelyn Carter. Fort Bragg Training Division, long-range instructor." He stopped, his breath catching slightly as the pieces aligned in his mind. "You were not just good. You were the one they brought in when nobody else could solve the problem." A subtle shift moved through the crowd, the kind that does not make a sound but changes everything. Jason's expression tightened, not in defiance, but in realization, his earlier certainty replaced by a growing awareness that he had misjudged something far beyond a simple mistake. Evelyn did not respond to the man directly. She did not confirm his words, did not deny them, but the silence itself carried more weight than any explanation could have. The man let out a slow breath, almost a quiet laugh of disbelief. "I remember now," he said, glancing briefly at the others as if to ground himself in the present. "There were stories, not official, never public, but people talked. Precision at distances most people would not even attempt. Calm under pressure that made seasoned professionals second-guess themselves. He shook his head slightly, looking back at Evelyn with a mixture of respect and quiet astonishment. I thought those stories were exaggerated. No one interrupted him. No one challenged him. The room had shifted too far for that. Jason swallowed, his posture no longer guarded, his voice low when he finally spoke again. "You trained military shooters?" he asked, the question carrying none of the arrogance it once might have, only the need to understand what stood in front of him. Evelyn's gaze moved toward him, steady, unchanging, but there was something softer there now, something that acknowledged the question without elevating it. "A long time ago," she said simply. The answer settled into the space between them, quiet but undeniable. One of the younger shooters lowered his head slightly, almost embarrassed, as if replaying his earlier laughter in his mind. Another shifted his weight, crossing his arms not out of confidence, but out of discomfort, the reality of the situation settling deeper with each passing second. Jason exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his shoulders in a way that made him seem smaller, less certain, less defined by the confidence that had once carried him. He looked down briefly, then back at Evelyn, his voice measured, sincere in a way that did not come easily to him. "I misjudged you," he said. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that the room recognized immediately. Evelyn held his gaze for a moment, her expression calm, her presence unchanged by the apology, as if such moments were neither new nor surprising to her. "It happens," she replied quietly. There was no edge in her voice, no satisfaction, no need to correct or emphasize what had already been made clear. The room remained still, absorbing the shift, understanding. Now that what they had witnessed was not just skill, but something deeper, something earned long before this moment ever existed. And in that stillness, respect did not need to be demanded. It had already arrived. The air in the range felt different now, not tense, not uncomfortable, but grounded in a quiet respect that had not existed before, as if the room itself had recalibrated around a truth it could no longer ignore. No one returned to their previous conversations. No one reached for easy jokes or casual remarks. The shift had gone too deep for that. Evelyn adjusted her coat once more, a small, habitual motion that seemed to mark the end of something rather than the beginning, her presence already withdrawing from the attention that had gathered around her. The older man who had recognized her stepped back slightly, shaking his head with a faint smile that carried more admiration than disbelief now. "I cannot believe it," he murmured softly, almost to himself. "All this time, and here you are, just walking in like anyone else." Evelyn did not respond to that either. She did not need to. The truth had already settled where it needed to be. Jason remained where he stood, his earlier posture completely gone, replaced by something quieter, more reflective. He glanced toward the target display one more time, as if confirming that what he had seen was real, that it had not changed in his absence of certainty. It had not. The perfect grouping remained, silent and undeniable. He let out a slow breath and stepped forward, closing the distance between them not as someone asserting control, but as someone acknowledging it no longer belonged to him. "I have been shooting here for years," he said, his voice steady but subdued. "I have seen a lot of people come through that door." He paused, choosing his words carefully now, aware that each one mattered in a way they had not before. "But I have never seen anything like that." The admission hung in the air, simple and direct, carrying more weight than any earlier remark he had made. Evelyn met his gaze briefly, her expression unchanged, not dismissive, not accepting praise, just present. "There is always something new to learn," she said quietly. The statement was not directed at him alone, but it settled with him the most. Around them, the others began to shift slightly, not returning to normal, but adjusting to a new understanding of the space they occupied. One of the younger shooters stepped forward, lowering his phone completely now, his voice hesitant but sincere. Would you mind showing us how you did that?" The question was careful, respectful, stripped of any trace of challenge. A few others nodded subtly, their curiosity no longer driven by entertainment, but by a genuine desire to understand. Evelyn looked at them for a moment, her gaze moving from one face to another, taking in the change that had settled over the group. For a brief second, it seemed as though she might decline, that she might simply leave and allow the moment to remain as it was. But then she gave a small nod, not out of obligation, but out of quiet acceptance. "It is not about force," she said, her voice calm, steady, carrying easily through the silence. "It is about control, breathing, patience." The words were simple, but the way she spoke them made them feel heavier, more meaningful than any technical explanation could have been. The group leaned in slightly, listening in a way they had not listened before, not out of curiosity alone, but out of respect that had been earned without asking for it. Jason remained still, absorbing every word, every detail, not as the most skilled person in the room anymore, but as someone who had just realized how much he had yet to learn. And in that moment, the hierarchy that had once defined the space quietly disappeared, replaced by something far more valuable, something that could not be claimed, only recognized when it stood directly in front of you. The lesson did not end with her words. It settled into the room through the way she moved, the way she stood, the way she demonstrated without ever needing to elevate her voice or assert her authority. Evelyn stepped back toward the firing line, not as someone proving a point, but as someone returning to something familiar, something that had been part of her long before this moment ever existed. The group followed her quietly, their earlier energy replaced by a focused stillness, each person watching more carefully now, not for mistakes, but for understanding. She positioned herself again, slower this time, more deliberate in her explanation, her voice calm as she spoke. "Your stance is not about strength," she said, adjusting her footing slightly. "It is about balance. If you are steady here, everything else follows." Jason watched closely, his attention sharper than it had ever been, his earlier confidence replaced by a genuine effort to absorb what she was showing. He shifted his own stance slightly, mirroring her posture, testing the difference, feeling the subtle change in stability that he had never fully considered before. Evelyn continued, her movements smooth, precise, each adjustment small but meaningful. "Do not rush the moment," she added. "If you hurry, you lose control. And once control is gone, nothing else matters." The group remained silent, listening, observing, absorbing. One of the younger shooters tried to replicate her grip, adjusting his hands carefully, his usual impatience replaced by a quiet focus. Another slowed his breathing, matching the rhythm she demonstrated, noticing for the first time how much it affected his steadiness. Jason inhaled deeply, then exhaled slowly, aligning his focus with the target in a way that felt different from before, less forced, more deliberate. For a brief moment, the range no longer felt like a place of competition, but of learning, of quiet discipline, of respect earned through attention rather than display. Evelyn stepped back once more, giving them space, her role shifting without announcement from participant to guide, though she never claimed it. The group remained where they were, practicing in silence, each movement more thoughtful than before, each adjustment guided by something deeper than habit. Jason lowered his hands slowly, looking toward the target, then back at Evelyn, his expression no longer defined by pride or challenge, but by something far more grounded. "I spent years thinking I had this figured out," he said quietly. "Turns out, I was only scratching the surface." Evelyn met his gaze for a brief moment, her eyes calm, steady, carrying a quiet understanding that did not need to be explained. "That is how it works," she replied softly. "You think you have reached the top, and then you realize there is more." The words settled into the room, not as a correction, but as a truth that everyone present could feel. No one argued. No one dismissed it. They had already seen what happened when assumptions replaced understanding. The range slowly returned to life, but it was not the same as before. Conversations resumed, but quieter, more measured. Movements continued, but more controlled, more intentional. The invisible hierarchy that once defined the space had dissolved, replaced by something less visible but far more real. Respect had not been demanded, and it had not been given lightly. It had been revealed, piece by piece, through patience, through skill, through a presence that never needed to announce itself. Evelyn adjusted her coat one last time, her role in the moment complete, and without drawing attention, she began to walk toward the exit, her steps as calm as when she first arrived. No one stopped her. No one tried to hold her there. They simply watched, not with curiosity anymore, but with understanding. And as the door closed softly behind her, The room remained quiet for just a second longer than usual, as if holding on to something that had already changed them. Because that day, without raising her voice, without demanding recognition, she had shown them something they would not forget. That true skill does not seek attention, and true respect is never given to those who ask for it, but to those who earn it in silence.